Addict is a courageously honest account of Milton Schorr's life in active addiction and recovery. He's 2 decades sober and he relates the pivotal points in his journey towards death and back to life. This is a book where he bares his soul and shares his heart about his journey with addiction and recovery. He says, "I wanted to be who I felt I was, broken, a wreck, unlovable." My name is Nongcebo Vukile Mackenzie. Ngiyakwamukela. Welcome to the podcast. So the title of the book is Addict, A Tale of Drugs and Recovery. Milton, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast for this conversation.
What a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm always curious, how come people that have had an addiction of sorts, let me say an addiction to a substance, they will count, even if it's 20 years sober, even if it's 30 years sober, they will refer to that and say, I am a recovering addict of 30 years, I'm a recovering addict of 10 years, or I'm 20 years sober. How come the addiction and the recovery label is always attached?
Sure, that's an interesting question, and the answer's quite layered. I mean, it depends on the person. But probably if someone's choosing to describe themselves like that, then, there's a common reasoning behind it. And for me, it starts with, if you're a member of a 12-step program, then that is it's a part of your recovery, tracking the time you've been sober. And the reason for that is, these fellowships they exist for the benefit of the newcomer. They're built on someone with more experience helping someone with less experience.
Okay.
So a big part of, call it labeling yourself that, and I know people often find that problematic, like why would you label yourself something negative? For me, the positive in that label is I'm letting the newcomer know that I'm like them, but I'm that far down the road and there is hope. But then secondly, for me, it's important also to remind myself that I am an addict and it doesn't work for me to take substances. And really a big theme in the book for me, and it's something that I really wanted to address because I think often it's not addressed in sort of stories of addiction and recovery, is that addiction doesn't end. You don't sort of get to the end of your using and not be an addict anymore. Yeah, I mean, being an addict, it's described as a disease. I mean, I don't know about the mechanics of that. It seems like a weird thing to say, but it's certainly a personality type. And in my experience, it's not something that goes away. I'm still as much an addict today as I ever was, but I choose not to express that side of myself in destructive ways. But, for me, an addict is someone who's always longing to kind of escape the present for various reasons. And so we find ways to do it. And when someone discovers substances or a certain kind of behavior, it works so well that it becomes a real problem in life. But once you stop doing that behavior, that desire to escape is still there. So recovery is really about replacing the means of escape with something positive. And, I think generally one can say that the only thing more satisfying than drugs or sort of strong behaviors is some form of spirituality. And for me, that's as simple as connecting with others. To me, connecting with other human beings, connecting with self, that is actually the baseline of what spirituality is, and that is the baseline of what 12-step fellowships do. And also the baseline of addiction is being disconnected. So I know it's a long answer, but really I say that I'm an addict in recovery because what I'm saying is I'm someone that if I don't watch myself, I'll find ways to disconnect and escape. And these ways will cause problems in my life very quickly.
I would suppose then maybe that's why you'll find, as you say, that people would find a replacement addiction, a positive addiction, something rooted in spirituality. Maybe that's why you would then find that some people, when they stop using the destructive substances or stop using substances destructively, they would then throw themselves fully into something like the church or some other form of spirituality like yoga practice or any, I mean, just using those two as examples that come quickly to my mind, but I'm sure there's a plethora of others where they're then, as you're saying, seeking the escape.
You know what it is actually? It's seeking wholeness. And it's odd, you know, one way to describe wholeness is absence of self. It's like this feeling of being myself it's so limiting and uncomfortable. And when that moment of escape happens, there's freedom, but that freedom is actually what wholeness is. The sharp edges aren't there anymore. I don't know if that makes sense. And that it kind of happens in merging with something else.
Now, what that makes me curious about is what is it that at age 12, 13, 14 is giving you that feeling, that sort of what for most people that age, experimentation with things like thinners would just be a moment of naughtiness. But for someone like yourself, it's something deeper. And it's really where that's how we see it manifest, if I can put it that way. That's where it becomes practicalized and operationalized, for lack of a better word. What is creating that? Because, I mean, we think, our childhood innocence, you know, all of that. And we think, okay, the teens are a bit of a rough patch, but they get over it. But to have what you've just described now, that absence of self, those rough edges at such a tender age.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't have described it in that way at that age. Yeah. But the way I see it is addiction is a personality type, or call it a disease. And it's useful to call it a disease because it makes it very specific, and it is very specific. And that disease is one of wanting to escape. It's a certain personality type. It's described in sort of addiction literature as a constant sense of unease, a constant sense of restlessness, right? So that's one thing. But then add trauma to that, and then it gets magnified. But the problem with an addictive personality is addicts are almost always very sensitive people. So even if someone has had relatively mild trauma in their life, that might be more than enough to cause a state to want to escape from. So for me, it was just quite simple. My father was an alcoholic. Not that I had an experience of him being an alcoholic when I was very young, but it's in the family. It's sort of in the air. And so he and my mother had a bad relationship, and they divorced when I was 6. And I just felt utterly abandoned and alone. And also at that time, this was in the mid-80s, divorce was extremely rare. I mean, I was the only kid with parents that weren't together for probably 5 years, you know, until others started catching up. So for me, that was traumatic. And then add to that, our home life was just turned upside down. Like my father left, what money we had was gone, and suddenly my mother was looking after 3 kids on her own with no work experience. You know, it was very tough. And so home was not settled. Home was traumatic for me. And then I have this personality where I seek out ways to escape. And you combine them together, and it's a recipe for disaster. So, to me, the thing is, if someone is an addict, if someone has a personality, they're always going to get involved in these behaviors that take them down a dark path. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of inevitable.
So your parents get divorced, you leave your father's house at the age of 7. Your mother is, as you describe it in the book, she moves from sort of like being a queen, I mean, in parenthesis, of course, to now being working class. She's got 3 children, trying to find her way in Cape Town. And she then meets Uncle Soon, and you then move to the West Coast. Now, somebody might say, okay, well, there's the stability. There is what would then help establish that wholeness. There is something that would give you that sense of comfort, that sense of homeliness. Does it differ from person to person? That for someone it might fill some void. For another person, it does not. I mean, your foray into, with the long bus rides and, missing the bus sometimes and going onto the other side of the tracks, so to speak, to score, it enabled that to some degree. But for some people, that would be what would set them on the straight and narrow, having that sense of stability, being put in a rural area, in a more rural area, less fast-paced, more out in nature, fishing, busy, doing this, doing that. And it seems that wasn't the case for you.
No, it wasn't the case for me. That's the thing. It's so subjective. And really, if one's looking for a solution, I would say that the solution or the remedy is for someone to feel heard and feel seen. And for me, there was the potential. My mom. So the context there is, we're English speaking. My parents are from Zimbabwe, and she met this Afrikaner. And initially, it looked like everything was going to be great. But once we all moved in together, there was this big culture clash where us English kids are not as patriarchal. There wasn't just the sense of the man is Lord, doesn't matter what happens. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. It's just that we operate very differently. Like, English kids are often just sort of more outspoken, and it's not so much you respect someone because of their age, let's say. And so he and I just didn't get on at all. And so instead of there being, you would hope there would be this kind of connection. Rather, the disconnection was worse. Suddenly I was out of my comfort zone in the city, away from my friends, and in this rural environment that I didn't understand, where I didn't know anyone, and really no one spoke English. So it was sort of worse. But really what was lacking there, and it's for anyone, it's just this, everyone has the thing that's troubling them. And their thing is their thing. And it doesn't matter what it is. It can be big or small. And all that's really required, I think, is listening. And for me, I didn't know how to express what I wanted. I mean, I was so angry. And, I was angry with my father. You can't just replace your father. So, my reflection on what you're saying is that it's not so much about the external. There's a point maybe when something kicks off that the external maybe causes something to happen, but then really the problems are in the past, and the past isn't in the present. It isn't in your reality around you. It's inside you, and it's that needs to be sort of teased out. And that really was my big experience writing the book. Someone asked me the other day if it was cathartic to write it. And it wasn't really cathartic to write it because I'm writing it from 20 years later. But I've been through those moments of catharsis in therapy and realization, over the years. But what was really profound for me was seeing it all in perspective, and so making sense of it all. Because also, I had to take my life and put it into a narrative. So obviously I'm simplifying everything, taking gray and making it black and white for the purposes of telling a linear story. And that forced me to just make meaning out of it. And then, for me, it just became so kind of sillily clear that I come from a family in which addiction is present. So there's a genetic predisposition. And then I had a classic upbringing where I felt unseen, unloved, and unsafe. And then just at the right time, I discovered substances that made me feel safe. Because, really what addictive behavior does is it gives the person control. Like, for me, taking drugs, it's a way to control my emotions because I find my emotions overwhelming. I'm very sensitive. Drugs, both in the pleasure and the pain of them, give you control. It's the same with eating disorders, controlling your eating. It's this profound way to take a world that feels scary and just too much and too big and overwhelming and make it and dumb it down and make it fit into what makes me feel comfortable. And it's so interesting, the process of recovery really is going, there's a phrase where you've got to sit with your feelings. Like, addicts don't like sitting with their feelings. We find ways to avoid our feelings. That's what we're doing. So the process of recovery is sitting with them and making friends with them and not running away from them. Yeah.
It's paradoxical in a way because the very thing that leads you to spiral out of control, you seeking control by using it. That's quite paradoxical.
It is. It seems paradoxical, but actually where it isn't is what the addict is trying to control is this feeling of being overwhelmed inside.
Okay.
The behavior stops that feeling.
Aha.
It is actually working on the inside.
Aha.
But on the outside, consequences are building up and it's getting worse and worse. And so, yes, there the paradox happens. So the more we try to self-medicate, like, the classic example is addiction is like trying to cure a headache by hitting yourself in the head with a hammer. Right? It's a very good example, actually, because what happens is I've got a headache, so I smack myself in the head with a hammer. Maybe not that hard, but hard enough. The sensation of the hammer distracts me from the headache. But it doesn't last so long, and it's got to happen again, and it's got to happen again. But it works every single time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So on the outside, it seems utterly insane. But on the inside, what the addict is doing, it works. It's completely logical. Each time the addict doesn't eat or drinks or takes a drug, that awful feeling inside of not being enough, that feeling of restlessness is taken away. But then, of course, as you say, this is why you've got to find a different behavior, because these behaviors are not sustainable long term. They're so damaging and self-destructive. But that's the process, is one is trying to medicate this feeling inside. And the reason addicts do it endlessly is because it works.
In reading the book, the first few chapters really trace the journey from your father's house to the West Coast. And the pattern starts to develop, from drinking the brandy, finding the brandy, using the Tipex, eventually finding friends that you could experiment with in terms of substance use, to finally how you ended up getting arrested is stepping across to the other side of the tracks, because that's where you could buy certain types of drugs. But what's interesting in that first portion of the book is that obviously you're in a rural area, and there's, as you say, you describe it so nicely, as you go further up the hill, it's sort of like you can trace the money going up the hill, so to speak.
Yes,
on the lower part of the hill, at the bottom of the hill, is where you're going to find the less well-off people in the area. And then, as you say, you get arrested, the king is summoned, and you are catapulted now onto the top of the hill, but now back in Cape Town.
Yes,
but you find the same problem, because what we associate destructive substance abuse with is we associate it with people who are in areas where there's a lot of social ills, where economically those areas are not well off, where there's high unemployment, where there's, areas that are not serviced well, that, where you look at them and you think, okay, I'm not surprised that this would happen here. That is the stereotype that we build in our heads. But when we see fancy gated estates, and we see fancy homes, and we see private schools, we then stereotype again. We believe, everything is clean and shiny, everything is perfect. But what interests me is your father then comes. You then move in with him and his wife, and then you start going to private school, and that's where things really now escalate. And you put it, so clearly in the book on page 87, where you say, I wanted heroin. Now you talk about the movie, the Leonardo DiCaprio movie, Basketball Diaries. And it's interesting, again, what was interesting for me in the book is, I watched the movie when it came out as well, because I would have been in high school, or, it's so hard trying to trace, because you write the books in grades, obviously for relevance, but we would have been in standard something, hey?
Yes,
So I can't remember if it was like...
I was sort of standard 8 at the time or so.
Yeah. So when the movie came out, it scared the living daylights out of me, because I was like, phew. But it's interesting how the stimulus response is different for different people, because for you, that is what you wanted, and that is what you saw, and you saw it acted out, and that's what made sense, in parenthesis, for you. And that's how you were able to crystallize, I want heroin.
What I saw in that movie, and for me, what was so powerful was, I think, because Leonardo DiCaprio has an amazing way of sort of crying. He just lets it all out. He just sobs. He's snotting and tearing. And I think what really captured me about that movie was his character was expressing himself. He was expressing himself by going down this path of destruction. And, it's not so obvious in the movie or focused on, but his single mom is raising him. And there's a lot of, tension between him and her. And that's something I really related to. And, really the movie is about, like, his mom, his relationship with his mother. Even though you see her quite seldom, in the beginning you meet him and her, and they have a kind of a friendship, and then he goes off in drugs. And as he gets worse and worse, she eventually has to kick him out of the house. But you see her pain when he's in pain. And that's what I wanted. I wanted my parents to see me and love me. And combined with my addictive personality and the situations I was in, it was absolutely logical for me to go and find the worst drug at that time, the most dangerous drug, as a way to call them. But what is fascinating, and this is what I've learned in recovery, is I wasn't trying to call my parents of the day. I was trying to right the wrong of the past. My younger self was trying to call my parents that abandoned me then. At the age of 16, when I decided to do this, my mother was trying, but I was too angry with her. And my father came to fetch me. But I didn't try and bond with him. I carried on being angry and rebellious. And it's the same sort of thing as what we're saying now about it seems illogical. It's what's going on inside. You know, I was stuck with this knot inside that's located in the past. And in that movie, I saw the solution to that pain of the past, which is, this is how I can express myself. But one is blind. You know, addiction is blindness. It's denial. It's not realistic. So, you know, that was my attraction to that movie. In it, I saw in him how I felt. And I wanted to express that, to try and get relief from the past. And of course that didn't work, you know, and that's why people are stuck in self-destructive things, because, you know, they're bargaining with something that doesn't exist anymore. You know, someone was hurt as a child and now they're 50 years old and they've got problems in life. And they don't really realize it's coming from somewhere in the past. And the behaviors, you know, someone who's constantly in a bad relationship, let's say, a string of marriages, and each one sort of ends up the same. It's because that part of them inside themselves is still doing the same thing that child wanted. You know, and the solution is to understand what's going on, so that then you can start to apply your adult mind to things and realize, well, maybe I can do something different. You know, addiction is just all about denial. It's all about not really knowing what the truth is. Yeah.
You've just said something so powerful, because the terms that are often used for people that are trying to cope with something that happened in their childhood or in their past with some form of addictive behavior, some form of destructive addictive behavior, is we'll hear they're battling with their inner demons, or they're struggling to come to terms, or they're struggling to cope. I've never heard it put in a way that is how you've put it now. You are bargaining with something that doesn't exist anymore. So how I'm understanding that, even outside of an addiction context, you know, you'll sometimes hate somebody who mistreated you 10 years ago and they were downright awful to you, and you still hate them, and you still have conversations with them in your head, and you still have conversations with them about them with your friends, and you are bargaining with something that doesn't exist anymore. It's not in the present. And I've never heard it put that way. So, you know, and the reason why I'm taking it out of the substance abuse context is that a person might say, well, I'm not doing drugs, well, I'm not drinking, well, I'm not. In coping with whatever hurt that we've experienced in whatever context, you know, they'll say don't ruminate and what have you, and sometimes you do, sometimes you'll think about it, and sometimes you'll cry, and sometimes, you know, but when you then start to engage in certain behaviors that will not have a good outcome for you because you are bargaining with something that does not exist. Oh, that's powerful. Oh, that is so powerful. Yeah.
I remember, for me, you know, what's interesting about this book is it ends really when I get into recovery, and then we jump 20 years and I give a summation of who I am now. But really everything I've learned has been in the 20 years that isn't in the book. But it's difficult to write about because it's not dramatic. It's this long, slow, grinding process of slowly figuring things out. But for me, I had this experience when I was roughly 10 years clean. That's when my awakenings really started. You know, it takes a long time. I had this amazing sponsor, and I was once again coming out of a relationship that I just could not handle. I could not handle intimacy. And this guy was able to show me that I was still craving my mother's love. You know, what happened for me is my mom kind of disappeared because she was trying to look after all of us. I just had no relationship with her anymore. And I didn't even really realize it. I always thought I had issues with my father who left, but actually I had more issues with my mother. And this guy showed me that every relationship I've ever had, but almost every interaction I've ever had, there's a part of me that is trying to get my mother's attention. But the person whose attention I'm trying to get is my mother when she was 35. At that time, my mother was 60, and I wasn't really interested in my mother. I would speak to her once a month, sort of out of duty. But inside, I'm craving the attention of this woman who doesn't exist. He literally said that to me. Do you see how you're trying to get the attention of someone that doesn't exist? And it just was like, what? It's so powerful. And then you realize something. You can call them maybe dysfunctional beliefs. People carry beliefs about the world and about themselves. And that informs their point of view and therefore their behavior. And if someone is being self-destructive, it is because they have a belief that is at odds with reality, and they probably don't know it because no one really wants to be self-destructive. No one chooses that. You'd rather choose to be happy. Anyone would. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, our default settings are towards self-preservation.
Yes.
So when you self-destruct, as you say, your beliefs are at odds with reality.
Yeah, because that self-destruction is an attempt at staying safe. It's just like that thing with the hammer. Like the hammer, it's so violent, but actually it is the only thing the person knows that distracts them from the migraine. It feels better because at least you can control it. Yeah.
Now I'm curious because you've been able to sort of dissect the various aspects of your anger.
Yes.
So the not fitting in on the West Coast, the parents separating, the lack of emotional availability from your mom, which was, of course, not through any desire of her own. It's just coping with 3 children. I'm trying to look at this from a parent's point of view because there might be a mother who's listening, and oftentimes, actually, you'll hear this from a parent. And we see these horrific things now on Facebook that just hurt you so badly. There was a girl who posted on, I think it was on TikTok, her brother is on some substance.
Yes.
I don't recall if she articulated what it was, but on most nights when he is on whatever substance that is, he beats their mother so badly, and he swears at her and he abuses her, and it's really, really awful. And obviously people were saying to her, but you're recording this, why aren't you doing anything? And she was explaining to them, well, this is not a once off. Just because I'm recording this today, it doesn't mean I haven't done anything on other days. And you're seeing this mother who's going to work, who for whatever reason is a single mother and is raising 2 children. There's single dads. This is not just about single mothers. A parent provides as best as they can. So they make a home out of what they can afford to make a home. For some people, it's fancy homes, and for some people, it's just basically a roof above your head. But I think the common denominator when a parent would hear this, and this is not to negate your perspective or your feelings or any such thing. I'm just trying to look at it from a parent's point of view, where most of those parents would say, I got out of a bad marriage so that you guys could feel safe in a home. I didn't want to raise you guys in an abusive home or in a home where there's substance abuse or where I was not happy because I was losing myself. The contexts vary, right? And the mother will say, I'm a nurse. I work 12-hour shifts, or I'm a security guard, I work 12-hour shifts to provide for you because your parent, your other parent is not coming to visit you, they're not providing, they're not paying maintenance. There are many, I'm just, literally cherry picking with the examples that come quickly to mind. But there are many, many contexts where a parent would say, oh, come on. Really, I'm literally breaking my back to give you the best life that I can give you. And I am not out working as a security guard because I want to. It's because that's the job that's available, and it's the job that will feed you, send you to school, etc. And you are angry with me, and you are angry with yourself, and you are destroying yourself when I'm out here doing the best that I can. Now, with your reflection over the past 20 years, post your addiction, how do you look at that now? What would you say to that parent?
In terms of
the perspective of the child, because how parents often take it as though the child is being disrespectful, is being rude, doesn't appreciate all the effort that they're making, all the,
I mean,
and they blame themselves also. That's the other thing. They blame themselves, like, what could I do better?
Yeah, I think there's different aspects to it. And the first one, let me say, for me, I embrace my past fully and appreciate it. I didn't behave the ways I behaved because of what my parents lacked.
Yes.
It contributed, but there's many people that had a far worse upbringing than I did who just remained wonderful. At every stage, I had choices, but I always chose self-destructive means. The essence of addiction is there's no excuses. Addicts are not excused from their behavior. But in order to change, they need to understand it. So the first aspect of what I'm saying is it's not my mother's fault, like 1,000%. It's not my father's fault. It's my fault. And therefore, that arms the parent. I mean, if I have a son, he's nearly 23 now. And lucky for me, and it's testament to his mom, who's also an addict, but also in recovery, who just made sure that, she kept his home stable. But also, he's not an addict in his heart for whatever reason. So I'm lucky I didn't have to deal with that stuff. But if I did have to, for me, the plan of action, is honest connection, keeping the door open, connecting with your child, speaking honestly, but also if they are not behaving well, there are consequences. And the parent, is a human being as well. So let's say this person who's working as a security guard and the child is ungrateful. Like, there's a point where, well, that's life. Like, I don't think a parent whose child turns out bad should blame themselves too much. I mean, in my case, my parents came straight from the civil war in Zimbabwe, in which they lived their own experience for a decade. They were attacked in their home multiple times with bombs. My dad was a soldier from the age of 17, and what that entire society did to cope was drink. And they got married at the age of 20 with zero knowledge of how to communicate. It was never going to work. So I suppose what I'm getting at is all we can do is work with the truth. But it's when we work with the truth that healing happens. So here's your like mythical security guard mom. That's the truth. She only has this much time for her kids. If she can, I recommend that she try to just speak to them honestly and explain to them what life is like and what's happening for her, and how she knows that there's maybe an element of parenting lacking here, but she isn't able to fill it, but she is there with the love she has. You know, and it's tough.
Yeah, it is.
And then the child needs to do what they need to do. But you know, the more, I just think all it is availability. Like for me, my father, I had no idea who he is. I saw him very seldom, like once every 2 years sometimes. But then the messaging I got from my mother was that he was a very bad person. And so in my mind, he was someone that I longed for.
And how can you be longing for a bad person, you know?
Exactly, you know, and it caused so much. But, you know, he hurt my mom so badly, or my mom was hurt, you know. It's just, so how I learned from that is, you know, I didn't grow up with my son. His mom and I split up when he was about 2. But my practice with him was to always be nearby and always to be available, so that I wasn't this weird mystery in his life. Because that was what I found so painful. I just didn't understand what was going on. But we only learn this. You know, I only made a slight improvement, or maybe a big improvement on what my parents went through and how they behaved. But I didn't go through what they went through. Like, I can't even imagine what my dad went through. You know, and now my son is so clearly an improvement on me. Like, you know, this is how we learn. It's from mistakes. So yeah, that's kind of my big answer is, I am glad for my past because I've learned so much from it. And it's good for me to be an addict, because people who aren't addicts have the same pain, but not the same level of consequence. So they're not forced to learn as much. An addict has to learn, because otherwise we kill ourselves. And so I've had this gift of like learning, and I'm happy for that.
And what did you learn, if you're comfortable to share, from, there's the friend, I say in parenthesis because he became an acquaintance through your new schoolmates at the private school, the one who did die from an overdose. And, you know, when I read about his level of use, as you describe it in the book, and as you said, you simplified a lot of what was going on to create a linear story. I was amazed that he had actually been alive that long. And he eventually, you know, did overdose and he did die. And I can only imagine what that does, because doesn't it create sort of a conflict, because you're looking on one end at this substance or substances that bring you that temporary relief, but that you can see are destroying your life, and then you're looking at your friends who, okay, these are the people we do this with, and then through this escape mechanism that you guys are using, one of them dies, and it feels tumultuous just describing it. I can only imagine what it feels like living through the experience.
Well, this is the thing with that analogy of the hammer.
Yeah.
Is, you know, the hammer might kill you. You might hit your head too hard with the hammer and you might kill yourself, but still, it's the only thing you know that takes the headache away.
Yeah.
And the pain of the headache is worse than your fear of death. That's the bottom line. It's like, but it's on the level of like a mosquito, you know, the constant buzzing of a mosquito around you. It's not a huge pain. It's almost worse. Like a huge pain you can deal with. That's the pain of the hammer.
It's a dull,
you can
constant
define
throb.
it, you know, but this dull, irritating, constant, that's, you know, it's like Chinese water torture. It's just a drip, a drip, a drip. So about Manny in the book, he was actually very interesting to me because I always try and test my theories of addiction on my friends, in that, because it seems to me that every addict has a pain source for their behavior. But sometimes there are those, and I literally can think of only two in my mind and in my life experience. One guy that I know today who's in recovery and he's doing very well. And that guy, Manny, and I could never figure out what his problem was. He came from a wealthy family, but that really means nothing. You know, often wealth is more destructive spiritually, you know. But his family seemed pretty good, and he had an older brother who was very happy. He was just such a strange black sheep. And he just could not stop. And what I learned from him, what I'm left with from him, I suppose is on the level of like a movie star that died, like maybe Heath Ledger or River Phoenix or something. He was an amazing person. He was so charismatic. You know, he was always the life in any room. But part of the reason he was like that is because of his addictive behavior, his addictive personality. So what I learned from him is that life is sometimes tragic. You know, this conversation isn't about how do we make everyone safe. What it's really about is how do we deal with our own lives. And the nature of life is not going to conform to what you want. Sometimes it's utterly tragic. And so what I learned from him is he will always be this kind of part of me that is sort of full of joy, is full of energy, is always willing to like go on an adventure. And also not a warning, but an example of what I don't want. I don't want to waste the beauty that I have, the amount of energy that I have, the amount of talent that I have. Waste being not let it express itself as much as it can, let's say. You know? So yeah, that's what he leaves me with is life is difficult, but the beauty comes from turning it into your own script in relation to the truth of it.
I was left wondering how Eli is. Because that was a sad story, because his father had committed suicide in the home. And obviously you met Eli at school, and he was also into substance abuse. And I mean, you describe him as a very kind and soft and gentle person, and you can only just imagine how that experience would have affected him. And I wonder how he is.
Yeah, in the writing of the book, because I lost touch with most people, especially the high school people that I was involved with heroin in high school. And I often looked for Eli over the years, like try to look him up on social media, but could never found him. I heard that his sister had died. His sister was also an addict, a little bit older than him. So I assumed that he didn't make it. But serendipitously, let's say, the character of Britney popped up somehow. I saw her maybe on LinkedIn or something, like something just random. And I managed to connect with her, and we had lunch. And she was able to tell me that he is in the UK and he's got a family and he seems to be okay. So Isn't that nice? And yeah, he is, as you described, like he was such a beautiful soul. Like, yeah, so gentle, so soft, and so kind, and so obviously in pain. Yeah.
And is Britney okay? Because I was amazed, because you write the story obviously in grade 8. So she would have been in standard 6, and she was already into quite some serious drugs. Is she okay?
Yeah, I met her, and I mean, she's been through it. Like, she is okay, but she wears the scars. They're prominent, you know. I find Addict's beautiful. I find this part of my life beautiful. You know, I go to a meeting once a week where addicts gather together. Yeah, and it's my life. It's my church, really. It's where I really feel at home, and I feel at home among these people who, for whatever reason, their pain got the better of them, and they went through the mill. They went through hell, and there's something about a person that has been through hell. There's like a gallows humor, but there's an understanding. You know, there's a kinship. So yeah, she's quite the worse for wear, but she's making a good life for herself. She's got, I think, 2 kids, and they're doing well. And yeah, she's bettering her own experience in the way she's parenting them. But she's had a hard life, and you can see it. To me, it's that sort of Japanese technique of you fix a cracked bowl with gold. I can't remember what it's called now, but you know, the bowl that was cracked is now this beautiful, imperfect thing, and it is actually stronger than it was before. And it doesn't look how it was supposed to look. It's different. It's misshapen slightly, but that scar is actually gold. You know, it just depends what you do with it. Yeah.
So you spoke of David. He is going to be 23 soon. And in the book, you speak about, I'm not sure what the term you use within your family unit is. Some people would say stepfather, some people would say bonus father, some people would say his mother's husband or his mother's partner. So I don't want to make assumptions as to how you refer to the gentleman that you refer to as Sai in the book. But you speak about him very fondly in the book, and about how kind he was, and what an enabler he was for you to be able to show up for David.
Yeah, he's one of my great friends. Really is. He is an absolute blessing. He just finished reading it, I think 2 days ago. Sent me a message saying, just well done, so proud of you. And, you know, I got to say, well, thanks to you, you know, I wouldn't be here without you. And then he said, oh, well, thanks to David's mom as well. And I said, absolutely, she's the glue. We just the right mix of personalities. And, you know, and this is where I guess spirituality comes in. I'm not a religious person at all, but grace happens. Moments of grace happen. And they happen when they do, and they might take 20 years, but they happen. And they seem to happen at the right time. And for me, a moment of grace was David's mom picking him and him coming into our lives, because he's just so extraordinarily, call it egoless. Like, he's a very accomplished person, but he never really has the need to defend himself. I suppose because he's just that comfortable with who he is. So always our dynamic, like, I'm very fiery, his mom's also very fiery, and then he was always there in the middle, able to just go like, but guys, what's more important here? Why are you upset? Tell me, you know. So yeah, I have been blessed. Like we have a great family. David's mom was quite a lot older than me, or a bit older than me, so she had more kids with Sai, and I've always been in their lives. I always used to babysit when they were younger. They're all nearly grown up now. And, I've had Christmas there every year for the last 20 years.
My goodness.
Yeah, and generally, Sai, David, and myself will watch rugby together. Pretty much all the Springbok matches we'll get together. And he's his other dad. Like, when David was younger, we'd go to school functions, when he was in primary school and high school, and it would be just the two of us, like his mom's not there for whatever reason. And we'd just say, no, we're David's dads. And we just leave it there. And of course, there's a lot of like shifty glances and not sure what to say,
I can imagine.
Yeah, and it's not the norm, but I can say that also it wasn't just luck. We just all, because Sai also, he came from a very tough childhood. I mean, he's an example. I think he went to 20 schools.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they moved so many times. His upbringing was so unstable. But his response was always just gentle kindness and just kind of keep going and get things done. His example of what I'm talking about, like not an addictive personality. But because we all had these difficult childhoods, we all had the same vision of the kids are more important than our own egos. And we each just individually equally had that same ethos. So every time, of course, there were lots of issues that came up between us. We were all able to just go, all right, I'm really angry, but it's not helping. So I'll speak to you guys next week, whatever it is, and we worked on that, and, I'll own that, but it's, life's strange, eh?
But as you so beautifully put it and so poetically put it, as you said, you believe in grace and in moments of grace, and your moment of grace was when David's mom picked him. Oh, that's just so beautiful. I read this, and it's really not a funny moment in the book. It really is not. But I laughed because obviously, as you said before, you simplified things to tell a linear story. For us, reading the book, it's sort of like tracks a timeline. But obviously, we know there's the ebbs and flows of the realities of life in between, the light and shade of it all. But to us, because that's how the book is written and that's how books are written, it's so simple to see that the drugs are the problem. And then you say in page 169, and again, I emphasize it's not funny, but when you say...
it's hilarious. It's hilarious.
And then you say on page 169, and then I'll read it. And then a thought I will never forget, which rose in me on an electric rush of emotion that crackled the tears on my cheeks. It's the drugs. I shit you not, this was the first time I had thought of this. It's the drugs that are the problem. I sat straight up, ears pricked towards this new information. I realized then that I had always seen drugs as the solution to my emotional struggles, my eternal disquiet. But in fact, it was the drugs that were the problem. I shit you not, I hadn't once thought this until that moment.
Yeah, which is just true. And honestly, that's that hammer analogy. It's such a good analogy. It's like someone's been hitting themselves in the head with a hammer to control their headache. And after a few years, suddenly looking at the hammer going, hang on. The hammer is causing the headache. And, it's just true. But there is an added layer, though, which is it's not actually the drugs that were the problem. It's the addiction and the addiction behavior and the source of that underneath it. But it's like the drugs are like the sign. This is where you need to look. That was the one point I always thought was the good part. The hammer is the good part. No. The hammer's the bad part, my friend. Why are you hitting yourself with a hammer?
So I'm always curious, and as we end our conversation, because we've all lived and we all have weaknesses. We've all had experiences. We've all had our own ... ellipsis. And it takes a lot to write, to even tell someone about something that you feel maybe was silly, or something that you feel shame about, or any such thing. Now, to write a book that chronicles your journey of substance abuse, and you share some very intimate things. The gentleman that you met after your bike was stolen, and that encounter on that night. Maybe there are people in your life who read the book who might never have heard that. I don't know. Or maybe there are people who know you from afar, or, you've taught, you act and you do all kinds of work, and there are people who might not have known that about you. And now it's in the book. They know all about your family. And I actually still wanted to ask how your sisters are. You've spoken about your family, and you've laid that all out bare in what you feel is in a more simplistic way compared to your lived experience, as you explained. But to us, this is very, it's bearing your heart and your soul. And I'm always curious, because that takes a lot of bravery. And I'm always curious, why a book?
Well, I have very specific reasons that might be different to others, in that I was already a writer. This is my third book, and before I started writing novels, I wrote for TV and film, and I started in theatre. Like, my calling in life, as I choose it, is I'm a storyteller. And I've been working hard at it for as long as I've been in recovery, really. And I never wanted to write about that sort of thing. I didn't want to write my story, mainly because I felt that doing that would be sort of a bit sensationalist and a bit cheap. Like, I wanted to succeed in fiction, actually. And I've usually find books about addiction to be sensational and untrue. Like, they're sort of presented as sort of these heroic tales, where this person just flies too close to the sun and eventually they learn a lesson, exactly like the Basketball Diaries. I mean, that movie ends with he's suddenly better, and I always just thought that was silly. But in tandem to that, I've been in recovery for 20 years, and I've been both been counseled by others and counseling others. And the way we do it is we simply tell our story. You tell your story, someone hears it and they can relate to their own life. And then the parts where they are confused, suddenly there's clarity in hearing someone else's experience. These things were always running side by side until last year, really. It just kept coming up in a way that, again, sort of serendipity or grace. I was ready to look at myself in this way. I just kept hearing people saying, why have you not written about this? And in my fiction, the themes of my life are very much there. They're just in the fictional life of characters. And so then the question became, because my enjoyment of writing is to communicate something that becomes special for the reader, that really changes them in some way. And it's not that I want to change them, but I want to really offer something beautiful and honest that becomes a treasured part of their life. That's my main objective as a writer. That's what I love. And so then the question was, like, what am I doing? The thing that I probably know the best, that I could probably write about with the most honesty and the most passion and maybe even the most simplicity, I'm refusing to write about because of like a prejudice against books about addiction. And it just then became just obvious that I must at least try. So, that's why on the surface I did it, but then inside it was also just a natural progression of, as someone in recovery, my goal is to help others. This is the way I stay. This is my new drug, is helping others. And I'm not like a philanthropist. I'm selfish. I just work, This is the way that I do it. It's not like I'm a good person. I'm not. I'm a grumpy, prickly, difficult character a lot of the time. But at the same time, I have this to offer the world. I would say this is what I have to offer the world. And in whatever way, big or small. And I think the best anyone can do is offer what they have, big or small. So, yeah, that's why. And then, it's, being so honest about things. But everyone has a skeleton in their closet. Everyone. Everyone knows the what it feels like to have experienced something that isn't, socially acceptable, but it's real, and they carry it. And how do you deal with these things? And, my whole, I guess, perspective is the truth is what heals. So let's talk about the truth. And it was quite frightening, especially it was around when we were choosing the cover. And the publisher kept saying, well, the cover, which is just your face, is really the strongest. I didn't want that. But it was true. And that made it real to me. Like, this is what this book is. I'm bearing my life. But I got to deal with that then. So actually, by the time the book came out, I'd already dealt with it. And now, the responses are like your response. The responses are that, wow, this book was helpful to me. I appreciate this book. And that's the point. Like, what better could I do with my life? Nothing. There's nothing. So I'm quite happy with it. Yeah.
Milton, thank you so much. But I am curious, how are your sisters?
They're good, eh?
Both of them.
Yeah, each in their own. Both became addicts. My older, obviously, sooner, and then my younger. And both are in their own form of recovery. My older's in therapy and learning so much. My younger got into also 12-step fellowships. And so, yeah, it's like I said, they have scars. We all have scars, and they all affect us. But they also become our strength rather than our weakness. And it's also a reflection of my family. There's a description of addiction is it's like a bomb going off in the living room. It just scatters bodies. My family is scattered. A lot are living in Australia. My father's in Asia. I'm here in South Africa. We're very far apart. We all get together maybe every 5 years. But our relations are so honest. Like, we're not that close, but we are so intimate. And there's no secrets. We know each other. And I just treasure it. I treasure it. Like, my father and my mother, they're not close, but everything is resolved and everything is true. Let me put it that way. In our family, everything is true, and I think it's amazing. Yeah, this book has been good. Obviously everyone read it, and obviously it was a bit difficult, but it also caused good conversations and better relationships all around. Yeah.
I love how you've put that. We are not close, but we are intimate, and everything is true. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Milton, and thank you for sharing your story and for sharing your journey.
Thank you. Gee, I appreciate your interest so much. And thank you for just a wonderful, deep interview. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the podcast. Remember, you can like, rate, and share this podcast from the channel you're listening on.